The cold steel table was smeared with sweat and blood, though neither seemed to belong to the silent man slouched in the chair. His face, bruised and swollen, wore an expression that unsettled his captors. Not because he looked afraid, far from it, but because he wasn't afraid at all. He sat in chains, his wrists locked tightly to the table, yet he seemed almost amused. Commander Vyrkar's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "I will ask you one last time, human. Who are you?" His reptilian eyes narrowed, a clawed hand drumming impatiently against his belt. Behind him, two guards, thick-armed, scaly brutes armed with plasma rifles, shifted uneasily. They had seen enough prisoners broken in this room. This one should have been no different. Daniel Cross barely lifted his head. Dried blood clung to the corner of his mouth, but his lips curled into a crooked smile. "I'm just a guy," he said quietly. His voice was hoarse but steady. Vyrkar leaned closer, his breath like rotting meat. "You are no guy. You're something else. No one keeps their mind intact after the neural strain protocol. No one stays calm after watching their comrades torn apart." Daniel's gaze flicked upward, locking eyes with the alien commander. His smile widened. "Maybe I just really hate your face," Daniel muttered. Vyrkar's hand shot out, fingers closing around Daniel's throat like a vice. The guards stiffened as Daniel choked, yet there was no panic in his eyes, no sign of fear at all. Instead, Daniel chuckled between gasps. "You think this is funny?" Vyrkar growled. Daniel's grin refused to fade. "Yeah," he rasped. "Because you're still clueless." The commander slammed Daniel's head against the table with a force that would have snapped most men's skulls. Daniel groaned but kept grinning, blood trailing down his temple. He let out a weak, breathless laugh. "You know," Daniel muttered, "I'd really hate to be you, when you figure it out." Vyrkar's patience snapped. He stormed out of the room, barking orders at his guards. The moment they were alone, one of the guards jabbed Daniel in the ribs with his rifle, enough to hurt but not enough to kill. Daniel winced, then laughed again, softer this time. "You know," he murmured, "I could have ended this hours ago." The guards exchanged a look, confused. Daniel lowered his head, fingers twitching slightly toward the chain around his neck. A dull, silver dog tag dangled there, battered and worn, but still intact. He whispered to himself, "They shouldn't have taken these off." The cell door slammed, and Daniel was left alone. His fingers idly played with the dog tags. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly. The memories pressed against his skull, memories he couldn't explain, memories that felt impossible. Faces of people he didn't recognize, training sequences from places he'd never visited, battles that felt both familiar and foreign. He wasn't sure how long the dog tags had been holding all of this back, or why. He only knew that the moment they came off, whatever was inside him would come crawling out. 3 hours later, Vyrkar returned. This time, he wasn't alone. A device, cold and metallic, hung from the alien's clawed hand, a neural disruptor designed to rip thoughts apart like tissue paper. The commander placed the device on the table. "I'm done asking questions," Vyrkar sneered. "I'll pull the answers from your skull myself." The device buzzed to life, a pulsating blue glow flickering like lightning trapped in a bottle. Daniel glanced at it, sighing. "You really don't want to do that," Daniel warned. "Spare me your bravado," Vyrkar hissed. He reached for the disruptor. "You're about to make a really bad mistake," Daniel said flatly. Vyrkar's clawed hand paused. "Why?" Daniel's smile turned cold. "Because I remember what happens when this thing breaks." Before Vyrkar could react, Daniel twisted his neck, snapping the chain of his dog tags free. The silver tags clattered onto the table. The change was immediate. Daniel's eyes darkened, and his muscles tensed like cables tightening beneath his skin. His breathing deepened, and for a moment, the air seemed heavier, charged, unnatural. A terrible calm washed over him, and when he looked up again, his smile was gone. The first guard lunged, but Daniel moved like lightning. His chair screeched backward as his fist shot out, snapping the alien's wrist with a brutal crack. The plasma rifle spun from the guard's hand, and Daniel caught it mid-air. With inhuman precision, he fired, a single shot taking the second guard cleanly through the throat. Vyarkar's face twisted in disbelief. "Impossible," he snarled. "Yeah," Daniel said grimly. "You should have left the tags on." He fired again, sending the commander sprawling against the wall. Moments later, Daniel was dragging the lifeless bodies into the corner, swapping one of their uniforms for his bloodied prison attire. He tucked his dog tags back into his pocket, reluctant, yet knowing they might be the only thing keeping him from losing himself completely. As he stepped out of the cell, he paused, turning back to the room. The flickering disruptor still hummed weakly on the table. "Good luck," he muttered under his breath before disappearing down the corridor. The ship's alarms blared as Daniel weaved through the halls. His mind raced, pulling strategies from memories he didn't know he had. He found an access panel, slicing through the wires and plunging the nearest corridor into darkness. "You're impressive," a voice drawled from behind him. Daniel spun, aiming his stolen rifle. Standing before him was a short, wiry alien with oversized goggles perched on his head. The alien, unarmed and grinning, raised both hands in surrender. "Relax," the alien said. "Name's Jib. Let's just say I'm not a fan of these Zalzar jerks either." Daniel eyed him carefully. "You're a prisoner too?" "Nah," Jib said with a smirk. "I was. Until I talked my way out of it. Turns out they hate jokes." "Who knew?" He tapped his goggles. "I've been sneaking around since." Daniel sighed. "I don't have time for this." "Well," Jib said, pointing toward the ceiling as red lights flared down the corridor, "you might want to make time. Because they're about to corner you in 3, 2. Footsteps thundered around the bend. "Fine," Daniel growled. "Get moving." The two of them sprinted down the corridor, slipping into a supply room moments before guards stormed past. As Daniel leaned against the wall to catch his breath, Jib grinned. "You're insane," Jib said. "I like it." "Yeah," Daniel muttered darkly, gripping the cold metal of his dog tags. "You won't for long." The ship's dim corridor flickered with pale, buzzing lights as Daniel leaned against the wall, breath shallow and pulse pounding in his ears. The weight of the dog tags pressed heavily against his chest, their cold metal a reminder of what he was now fighting to suppress. His fingers itched to tear them off again, to let that overwhelming power rush through him, but he knew what that would mean. He could still feel the fading echo of it, that unsettling voice whispering in his mind, urging him to hurt, to destroy. He knew better than to trust that feeling. Beside him, Jib fussed with a tiny device, fingers flickering across glowing buttons. The wiry alien's goggles magnified his oversized eyes, giving him the appearance of a perpetually startled bug. He grinned as he tapped the final sequence into the device, then gave Daniel a smug nod. "That should keep their trackers blind for a few minutes," Jib said. "Not long, but long enough to move." Daniel barely acknowledged him, eyes scanning the corridor ahead. "Where's the control room?" he asked coldly. Jib chuckled and wagged a finger. You could try being a little nicer. Most people say thanks when you save their life." Daniel turned his head, eyes narrowing. "You didn't save my life. You got lucky they didn't see you." Jib's grin widened. "Luck's my specialty." Daniel pushed past him, moving through the corridor with a predator's focus. Jib scurried behind, his steps light and quiet. As they moved deeper into the ship, Jib tapped Daniel's arm. "So," Jib whispered, "what's the deal with those tags? The second you ripped them off, you turned into a nightmare. Kind of impressive. Kind of terrifying." Daniel clenched his jaw. "They keep me under control." "Under control?" Jib's voice rose. "That's what you call whatever that was. Look, I don't know what kind of freaky earth tricks you've been practicing, but I'd rather not be in the blast radius next time you decide to go full berserker." Daniel stopped walking. The memories were surfacing again, flashes of people screaming, of bodies strewn across a smoking battlefield. He remembered being held down by his own squad as they locked those tags around his neck. His hands shook, and he forced them still. "It's not a trick," Daniel said quietly. "And it's not something I can control." He took a slow breath. "The dog tags, they suppress something in me. Something that shouldn't exist." Jib's smug grin faltered, and for once, he seemed genuinely serious. "What are you talking about?" Daniel shook his head. "I was part of a project back on Earth, Project Revenant. They wanted soldiers who could fight like machines. Faster. Stronger. Deadlier. They started mixing alien DNA with human hosts." He exhaled sharply, disgust clear in his tone. "Turns out, they succeeded a little too well. Some of us, we couldn't stop. Couldn't turn it off." His fingers drifted to his dog tags. "They figured out these could suppress it, keep the rage buried. Keep us human." Jib stared at him in stunned silence before letting out a low whistle. "Well," he muttered, "that explains why you fight like a lunatic." He paused. "What happens if those tags break?" Daniel's hand unconsciously squeezed the tags. "We don't talk about that." Before Jib could press further, a crackling voice echoed through the ship's calms. It was Vyrkar's growling snarl. "Attention all units! The human fugitive is loose. He is extremely dangerous. Orders are shoot on sight. Bring me his head." Jib grinned. "Sounds like someone's popular." Daniel grabbed his arm and pulled him forward. "We need to move. Now." The ship's corridors became a maze of flickering lights and mechanical hums. The guards were everywhere, their boots clanking heavily against the metallic floor. Twice, Daniel and Jib ducked into side rooms as patrols passed. Each time, Daniel's fingers instinctively touched his dog tags, silently counting his breaths to keep his focus. The moment that power returned, that violent hunger scratching at his mind, he knew it would be hard to resist. Eventually, they reached the engineering deck. Massive conduits stretched across the walls, pulsating with energy. The air buzzed with the constant vibration of the ship's core. Jib's eyes lit up like a child seeing fireworks. "Oh, I love this room," Jib whispered excitedly. "Wanna know why?" Daniel sighed. "Not really." "Because," Jib grinned, "this is where I can make big explosions." He pointed toward a terminal near the core. "I can override the ship's power grid. Shut down the locks on the escape pods and send a reactor surge through the ship's main system. No more alarms, no more scanners. Easy peasy." Daniel eyed him. "What's the catch?" Jib's grin faltered. "Well, it might also blow half the ship to pieces. Maybe the whole ship. Depends on how fast we run." Daniel shook his head. "Of course it does." Jib got to work while Daniel stood guard. The distant echo of footsteps was closing in, and Daniel's grip tightened on the rifle he'd stolen. He knew it wouldn't be enough. If they cornered him, if they forced him to pull the tags off again, there was no telling what would happen. The memory returned, a woman's face, her voice soft yet terrified. His commanding officer back on Earth. Her last words before locking his tags in place. "If you lose control again, don't stop for anything. Don't let anyone slow you down. Just run. Because you won't know the difference between friend and enemy when it happens." His hand twitched against his chest. A burst of static hissed from Jib's device. "Got it!" Jib shouted. "I've got 10 minutes before this thing goes critical. Let's—" The door burst open. 5 Zalzar guards stormed in, rifles raised. Daniel fired before they could react, dropping 2 of them. The others spread out, returning fire. Jib dove behind a console, cursing loudly. "You sure you don't want to go berserk again?" Jib yelled. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Not an option." The guards closed in, plasma blasts scorching the walls around them. Daniel emptied his rifle, but the remaining guards kept coming. He could feel his breath quickening, his muscles tightening. The voice was back, low, urging, hungry. "Let me out," it whispered. One of the guards grabbed Jib, yanking him from cover and shoving a blade against his throat. "Drop your weapon!" the guard barked. Daniel froze, chest heaving. His fingers hovered above his dog tags. Daniel! Jib choked. Whatever you're thinking, don't do it. The guard pressed the blade harder, drawing a thin trickle of blood. Let me out, the voice inside Daniel repeated. I can end this. I can kill them all. His hand trembled, the metal tags digging into his palm. Memories of torn bodies, blood-splattered walls, and his own helplessness surged forward. Let me out. Daniel's fingers tightened, then stopped. He raised his empty hands slowly, stepping forward. Don't hurt him, he said quietly. The guard smirked. Smart human. Daniel's gaze flicked toward Jib, giving him a silent nod. Jib grinned despite the blade against his throat. Run, Daniel mouthed. Jib shifted slightly, just enough to stomp on the guard's foot. The guard howled in pain, and in that split second, Daniel lunged. His fist crashed into the guard's face, sending him sprawling. Jib scrambled away as Daniel grabbed his tags and whispered, Not yet, not yet! Together, they ran as the countdown hit 3 minutes. Behind them, the ship's core began to flicker. The alarms screamed louder than ever. The corridor shook violently as the ship's reactor core threatened to overload. Daniel and Jib staggered through the narrow passage, each footstep a desperate sprint away from the looming explosion. The alarms blared louder now, a shrill mechanical scream that seemed to follow them through every twisting hallway. Daniel could feel the sweat dripping down his face, muscles aching, the pressure of his dog tags pressing firmly against his chest. His mind buzzed with that familiar, unsettling itch, the one that told him to rip the tags off, to let the chaos inside him loose. Behind them, alien voices barked orders. The surviving Zalzar guards were closing in, their boots pounding on the metal floor. Daniel knew they wouldn't make it to the escape pods before the guards caught up. Worse still, the growing heat beneath his feet told him the ship's core was moments away from melting down. They needed a miracle, or something worse. Jib stumbled and nearly collapsed, gasping for breath. I can't keep up, he panted. His wiry frame, built more for talking and tinkering than running, was clearly failing him. Daniel grabbed Jib's arm and pulled him forward. You don't have a choice, he growled. Just move. I'm trying, Jib wheezed, stumbling again. The footsteps behind them grew louder. Daniel glanced back and saw 3 Zalzar guards rounding the corner, rifles raised. Plasma fire sizzled past his head, scorching the wall. There was no way Jib could outrun them. No way Daniel could hold them off without doing what he swore he wouldn't. The voice inside him was stronger now, clearer, cold, and commanding. You know what you have to do, it whispered. Let me out. Daniel clenched his jaw. He hated the voice. Hated how much sense it made. His fingers curled around the dog tags, knuckles turning white. He knew what would happen the second he removed them. Memories flickered behind his eyes, moments he had spent years trying to forget. The blood. The screams. The things he'd done when the tags weren't on. You can't win like this, the voice insisted. But I can. The footsteps drew closer. Daniel turned, shoving Jib toward the next hallway. Go, he ordered. I'll hold them off. Are you insane? Jib gasped. You can't fight all of them. I'm not planning to, Daniel muttered, his fingers slipping beneath the chain. Now move. Jib hesitated, eyes flicking toward Daniel's hand and the tags wrapped tightly around his fingers. Something in Jib's face shifted, a mix of concern and fear, but he obeyed. Without another word, he bolted down the hallway. The guards appeared seconds later, their rifles flashing blue as they fired. Daniel dived behind a bulkhead, narrowly dodging the plasma bolts. His heart pounded in his ears. The voice inside him whispered again, softer this time. Just a few seconds, it coaxed. Just enough to finish them. Daniel gritted his teeth, fingers curling tighter around the chain. He could feel his pulse hammering against the cold metal. For a moment, he thought he might resist, that he could fight his way out without losing control. But when the guards stormed closer, raising their weapons again, he knew there was no other option. With a deep breath, Daniel yanked the tags off his neck. The change was instant. A cold rush flooded his body, like ice spreading through his veins. His muscles tightened, his vision sharpened, and every sound became painfully clear. His breathing slowed, his heartbeat steadied. He felt powerful, too powerful. Before the guards could react, Daniel moved. He shot forward like a phantom, a blur of speed and precision. His fist struck the first guard's face, shattering bone. Before the second could turn his rifle, Daniel's hand grabbed it and twisted, snapping the weapon in half like a twig. The third guard stumbled back, his face twisted in shock, but Daniel was already on him. A brutal strike to the throat silenced the alien's scream before it could begin. When the last body hit the floor, Daniel stood still, chest rising and falling slowly. The ship around him seemed distant now, the alarms a faint hum compared to the thunder in his head. He could still feel it, that terrible hunger clawing inside him, begging for more. More! The voice whispered. There's more. Don't stop. Daniel's fingers shook. His vision flickered, shapes shifting into distorted shadows. For a moment, he swore he could still hear screaming, echoes of memories buried deep. He staggered back, his hand reaching into his pocket. The cold metal of the dog tags brushed his fingers. He clenched them tightly, willing himself to put them back on, to pull the chaos back inside. Not yet, the voice urged. You need me. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. Shut up, he muttered. Shut up, shut up. With a trembling hand, he forced the dog tags back over his neck. The cold metal pressed against his skin, and like a switch flipping, the power faded. His limbs felt heavy again, his heart racing in his chest like a war drum. The terrible hunger subsided, not gone, but buried. For now. Daniel! Jib's voice echoed from down the hall. He appeared moments later, wide-eyed and breathless. What the hell happened back there? Daniel wiped his bloody knuckles against his sleeve. You don't want to know. They ran together now, pushing toward the ship's hangar. The escape pods were clustered near the far wall, sleek metallic orbs just large enough for 1 or 2 passengers. Jib scrambled to the nearest console and began furiously typing commands. Come on, Jib muttered. We've got less than 2 minutes before this whole place turns into a fireball. Daniel turned his back to Jib, scanning the hangar for movement. For a moment, everything seemed clear. But then he spotted him, Commander Viwarkar stepping through the smoke, his charred armor still glowing faintly from earlier plasma fire. The alien's cold, predatory eyes locked on Daniel. You should have died in that cell, Viwarkar growled. Daniel clenched his fists. His muscles still ached from the power he'd unleashed minutes ago. He knew he wouldn't last in a fair fight. You can't win, Viwarkar sneered. This ship will burn, and so will you. Daniel glanced back at Jib, who frantically hammered away at the console. Almost there, Jib shouted. Yeah? Daniel muttered. Take your time. Viwarkar charged, and Daniel barely dodged in time. The alien's claws raked across Daniel's side, drawing blood. Daniel stumbled back, gritting his teeth. He knew what he had to do. The dog tags felt like ice against his chest, a reminder of the beast inside him. You need me, the voice whispered again. With a grimace, Daniel reached for the tags once more. Got it! Jib screamed. Pods are ready! Daniel twisted away from Viwarkar and bolted for the nearest pod. Jib was already inside, waving frantically. Daniel! Jib shouted. Viwarkar lunged. Daniel barely turned in time, raising his arm to block the strike. Pain surged through him as the claws raked his forearm, but he kicked back hard, sending the alien staggering. Get in! Jib roared. Daniel spun, leapt into the pod, and slammed the hatch shut. Moments later, the escape pod shot away from the burning ship. Through the viewport, Daniel saw the Zalzar ship erupt in a violent explosion, fire swallowing it whole. The escape pod hurtled through the darkness of space, a silent silver bullet streaking away from the burning wreckage of the Zalza warship. Daniel sat motionless, his head resting against the cold metal wall. The rhythmic thrum of the pod's propulsion was oddly soothing, but his mind refused to rest. His hand hovered over the dog tags on his chest, fingers tracing the engraved letters. The metal felt heavier than before, as if the power inside him was still pushing to break free. He couldn't shake the memory of what had happened back on the ship, the speed, the violence, the way his mind had blurred with rage. Every time he removed those tags, he lost a little more of himself, and each time it became harder to put them back on. Jib sat across from him, slumped against the opposite wall, still catching his breath. His goggles were askew on his forehead, and his jacket was half-scorched from the chaos they had just escaped. For once, Jib wasn't talking, which Daniel found more unsettling than comforting. The silence stretched between them for what felt like hours. "You okay?" Jib finally asked, his voice quiet. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said, though they both knew it wasn't true. Jib sat up straighter, adjusting his goggles. "I saw what you did back there," he said. "That wasn't normal." Daniel didn't answer. "You didn't just fight those guys," Jib continued. "You tore through them like a machine. Like you were programmed for it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That thing inside you, whatever it is, it's not human, is it?" Daniel shook his head. "Not anymore." Jib ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "Look, man. I don't know what those freaks did to you, but you've got to figure out how to control it. Because next time, I don't think you'll stop." Daniel's fingers clenched the dog tags so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I know." The pod jolted violently as it entered the planet's atmosphere. The metal groaned around them, the air outside screaming as they hurtled downward. Flames flickered across the viewport, streaks of orange and red swallowing the sky. Jib braced himself against the wall. "Please tell me this thing doesn't explode on impact," he muttered. Daniel barely heard him. His thoughts kept drifting back to the memories, the pieces of a past that never felt fully his. Faces of people he once knew, now distant ghosts. Soldiers screaming, their bodies broken on a battlefield where Daniel had been the cause of the carnage. He remembered their terrified eyes as he rampaged through their ranks, unstoppable and blind with fury. His own squad had restrained him, forced the dog tags back onto him like chaining a beast in its cage. The regret still twisted in his chest, a sickness that refused to fade. The pod struck the earth hard, skidding across rocky terrain before grinding to a stop in a cloud of dust and smoke. The air inside the pod filled with the scent of scorched metal. Daniel coughed, waving the dust away from his face. Jib let out a groan, rubbing his bruised shoulder. "Fantastic landing," Jib muttered. "You ever consider a career as a crash test dummy?" Daniel ignored him and pushed the hatch open. The air outside was dry and cold, the landscape a barren expanse of rocky cliffs and twisted trees. The sky was an angry red, casting a copper haze over the earth below. In the distance, faint lights flickered, remnants of a human outpost, no doubt one of the last remaining resistance settlements. Daniel climbed out of the pod and scanned the horizon. "We're not far from shelter," he said. "Shelter sounds nice," Jib muttered as he stumbled out beside him. "I vote for shelter." The two of them started walking, their footsteps crunching over gravel and dried brush. The air was still, too still, and Daniel's instincts prickled uncomfortably. He knew the Zalzar wouldn't stop hunting him. The wire car may have been lost in the explosion, but someone would take his place. The Dominion never let go of prey they considered valuable. Hours passed before they reached the outskirts of the settlement. The makeshift walls were patched with scrap metal and reinforced with battered concrete slabs. Towering floodlights swept the terrain outside, scanning for threats. A pair of human guards spotted them approaching and aimed their rifles. "State your business," one barked. "Relax," Jib muttered under his breath. "We just survived an exploding alien warship. We're not looking for trouble." Daniel raised his hands. "We're not a threat," he called out. "We need help." The guards exchanged wary glances before lowering their weapons. One of them, a grim-faced man with a scar running across his cheek, motioned for them to follow. The settlement was a grim patchwork of tents and crude shelters. Exhausted survivors moved through the narrow streets, their faces etched with fatigue. Children clung to parents, their wide eyes filled with fear. The air smelled of rust, smoke, and desperation. The scarred guard stopped outside a reinforced structure made from salvaged steel. "Commander Richter will want to talk to you," he said firmly before disappearing inside. Moments later, a tall woman in a worn military jacket stepped out. Her piercing blue eyes narrowed as she studied Daniel. "You're the one they've been talking about," she said coldly. Daniel shifted uneasily. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "You already have," Richter replied. "The Dominion's been tearing settlements apart looking for you. Whatever you're carrying, they want it badly." Daniel's fingers instinctively touched his dog tags. "I know." Richter's gaze hardened. "If you stay here, they'll come for you, and they won't stop until this place is nothing but ash." "I don't want to stay," Daniel said. "I just need supplies, a ship if you have one." Richter crossed her arms. "What are you planning?" Daniel hesitated. "Finishing what they started." Hours later, Daniel stood on a nearby ridge, watching the dark sky flicker with distant lights, Zalzar ships circling like vultures. The war wasn't over yet, not for him. Whatever the Dominion had done to him, whatever they had buried inside his mind, he knew they wouldn't stop chasing him. The memories of his rampages, the blood on his hands, none of it could be undone. But he wasn't going to let the Zalzar use him again. "You sure about this?" Jib asked, stepping up beside him. "Seems like a death sentence." Daniel glanced down at his dog tags. "I spent years trying to keep this thing inside me," he muttered. "But now, maybe that's what they're afraid of." Jib snorted. "Yeah, I'd be afraid too if I knew you could turn into a human blender." Daniel gave a dry chuckle. "They think they can control me." He paused. "They're wrong." Far above, the Zalzar warships drifted closer. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. The voice inside him stirred, stronger now, almost eager. "Let me out," it whispered again. This time, Daniel didn't answer. Not yet. Not until he had no choice. His hand gripped the chain tightly, feeling the cold press of metal against his skin. The voice would have its time. But not now. Not until he could make it count. Jib adjusted his goggles. "Just one thing," he muttered. "If you go full murder monster again, aim away from me, okay?" Daniel smirked faintly. "I'll try." They turned away from the ridge and began walking back toward the settlement. Behind them, the sky flared brighter as the Zalzar ships moved into formation. Daniel knew the storm was coming. And when it did, he would be ready. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that stretched thin and brittle, as if the air itself was waiting for something to shatter. Daniel stood at the edge of the settlement, fingers curled tightly around the chain of his dog tags. The faint glow of Zalzar warships flickered in the sky above, drifting closer like shadows inching over the earth. He could feel the tension in his muscles, the sharp ache that told him the power inside him was restless, stirring beneath the surface. Each heartbeat felt like a countdown, each breath like a step closer to the inevitable. Jib paced nervously behind him, muttering to himself. His usual smug grin was gone, replaced by a thin-lipped grimace. Every few steps he would pause, adjust his goggles, then mutter again. Daniel knew better than to ask what he was doing. Jib's mind worked like a tangled web, chaotic, unpredictable, but somehow always pulling the right string when it mattered. Tonight, though, even Jib seemed uncertain. "You really think this is gonna work?" Jib asked finally, his voice low. "It has to," Daniel said. His fingers pressed harder against his tags. "They're coming for me. If I leave this place unprotected, they'll burn it to the ground. If I stay..." His voice trailed off, and he let out a slow breath. "If I stay, I can end this." Jib stopped pacing and looked at him. "End it how?" he asked carefully. "Because last time I saw you lose control, You didn't exactly discriminate between bad guys and, well, everything else. Daniel's fingers twitched against the cold metal of his tags. He knew Jib was right. The memories still haunted him, the uncontrollable rage, the blur of violence, the feeling of being trapped in his own mind while something else took the wheel. He remembered the aftermath most of all. The bodies. The faces. The blood on his hands. He had put the dog tags back on too late that day. Far too late. I'll control it, Daniel muttered, more to himself than to Jib. You sure? Jib's voice sharpened. Because if you can't, I will. Daniel cut him off. His voice was hard now, sharp like steel. I don't have a choice. Jib stared at him for a long moment, then sighed and returned to fiddling with the device on his wrist. Daniel knew the odds were slim. The Zalzar wouldn't come in lightly. They would descend like thunder, overwhelming the settlement with fire and force. The only reason they hadn't attacked yet was because they wanted Daniel alive. They needed him. The power inside him, the thing that made him stronger, faster, deadlier, that was what they wanted. The Wirekar had tried to break him once, and now someone else would come to finish what the commander had started. The first ship arrived just before dawn, a sleek black vessel that hovered low over the settlement's perimeter. The air trembled with the low hum of its engines. Daniel stood at the center of the settlement's main street, rifle slung over his shoulder. Around him, resistance fighters scrambled into position, their weapons clutched tightly in nervous hands. Most of them weren't soldiers. They were farmers, scavengers, survivors who had been forced to fight because they had no other choice. Daniel knew they wouldn't stand a chance without him. The ship's hull split open, and a squad of Zalzar soldiers marched out, their armor glinting like obsidian. They moved with cold precision, plasma rifles raised and ready. Daniel counted at least 15 of them, too many for the settlers to hold back. A tall figure stepped forward, cloaked in crimson armor. His face was twisted with scars, his eyes a burning shade of gold. He wasn't Viwarkar, but the way he walked, the way he sneered, Daniel knew this was someone worse. You are Daniel Cross, the alien said, his voice deep and guttural. You will surrender, or this place will burn. Daniel's fingers curled around the tags at his chest. His pulse thudded in his ears, and for a brief moment, the voice inside him stirred again. Let me out, it whispered. I can end this. Daniel's grip tightened. I've heard that before, he muttered under his breath. He took a step forward, eyes locked on the armored figure. You want me? Daniel called out. Come take me. The alien commander raised a hand, and the soldiers opened fire. The air blazed with plasma bolts, searing bright against the morning gloom. Daniel dove to the side, rolling into cover behind a scrap metal barrier. Around him, the settlers returned fire, their shots wild and panicked. Daniel knew this wasn't a fight they could win. The Zalzar soldiers were too organized, too strong. It was only a matter of time before they overwhelmed the settlement. No, the voice hissed inside Daniel's head. Now, or they all die. Daniel clenched his teeth and grabbed the chain around his neck. His fingers shook as he yanked the dog tags free. The power surged through him like a violent storm. His vision sharpened, his muscles tensed, and the world seemed to slow. He moved without thinking, his body a blur of motion as he tore through the enemy ranks. The first soldier barely had time to turn before Daniel's fist caved in his chest. The second dropped his weapon and stumbled back, but Daniel was faster. He twisted the rifle from the alien's grip and used it like a club, breaking bones with brutal precision. Somewhere in the chaos, Jib's voice was screaming something, a warning, maybe, but Daniel couldn't hear it. The hunger had taken over, driving him forward. The world was red now, his mind drowning in fury. The alien commander appeared in front of him, raising a massive blade. Daniel's body moved on instinct, his arm shooting forward. His hand closed around the commander's wrist, snapping it with sickening ease. The alien screamed, but Daniel silenced him with a punch that shattered his skull. More soldiers came, but Daniel didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The rage inside him demanded more, pushing him further, faster, stronger. Blood coated his knuckles. His vision blurred. The voice inside him no longer whispered, now it roared. More! It howled. Finish them all! Suddenly, something hard struck him across the back of the head. Daniel staggered, blinking against the haze. He turned sharply, expecting another soldier. Instead, Jib stood there, wide-eyed and terrified, gripping a piece of metal piping like a weapon. Stop! Jib gasped. You're killing them all. Even our people. Daniel's chest heaved. He looked down at his bloodied hands. Bodies littered the street, both Zalzar and human alike. His vision swam, flickering between reality and distorted shadows. He felt the tags in his pocket, cold against his fingers. Put it back on, Jib pleaded. Before you lose everything. Daniel clenched the chain tightly and forced the tags back over his neck. The power fled from his body in an instant, leaving him cold and trembling. His legs buckled, and he sank to his knees. The voice inside him faded into silence. When Daniel finally lifted his head, Jib was kneeling beside him, still gripping the pipe in his hands. You good? Jib asked carefully. Daniel swallowed hard. I think so. Jib let out a shaky breath and dropped the pipe. Next time, he muttered. I'm just running. Daniel chuckled weakly, his fingers tightening around the dog tags. He knew the fight wasn't over. The Zalzar would return, stronger and angrier. The power inside him would never truly be gone. It was part of him now, a curse he couldn't outrun. But for now, the voice was silent. And that was enough.